Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today with a very special guest. Competitive Pokemon veteran, fellow YouTuber, the leader of a secretive cult-like group of elites known to outsiders as the Smogon Council, and most importantly of all, the man who defeated famous player MudkipNerd, not once but twice. I'm here with Finchinator. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for such a gracious introduction. It's really a pleasure to be here. I love always talking to you, of course, and the community. How are you doing?
I'm good. Gen 9 has been a bit of a roller coaster so far, and you're at the helm of it as the tier leader. I'm sure it's a bit overwhelming. My first question is a simple one. What's the origin of your username? I know a finch is a kind of bird, but is there anything more to that?
Actually, it has nothing to do with the bird, although I do quite like the bird. My last name in real life starts with Finch, Finch, and when I was younger, I quite liked playing baseball. Now, to this day, for those close to me, they know I follow baseball, American baseball predominantly very closely. And when I played when I was younger and I did well, which wasn't always. I'm not a stellar athlete. I'm maybe a little above average, if anything. But they called me the Finchinator when I was like 8 or 9 years old, and that stuck with me. And then I'm ancient now, so when I first started playing on Pokemon Online, for those of you who don't know, that's the predecessor to Pokemon Showdown. I was like, oh, I need a username to enter, and I became Finchinator, and then it stuck with me over time. I mean, a lot of people just call me Finch at this point, which it can't be confused with the bird, of course, which is the most popular origin of it. But no, Finchinator's just been like a real life kind of long nickname, if you will, and everyone can call me Finchinator, or even some people call me by my first name, Josh, as well, and all of them are fine.
That's a cool origin. Yeah, now that I think about it, it does sound like a sports high school nickname.
Yeah, it was more so middle school for me. I probably peaked a little early. I wasn't super talented. It was fun. I always do love following sports, so it's a nice little kind of side hobby I have alongside Pokemon, which is probably my first and foremost hobby, if you will.
Was baseball your first introduction into like a competitive environment? Is that?
Yeah, I played baseball and basketball growing up. Basketball, I was terribly uncoordinated with, but I was tall. So for a couple years, I was able to coast off just being the tall guy until people hit their growth spurts in middle and high school and caught up. In baseball, my bat to ball skills that they grew over time. I pitched decently well and I had good arms. So for a while, I was able to keep up. But the kids in the grade below me actually were so good that they played on like a national stage in something called the Little League World Series. So eventually, they overtook me and my peers, and I stopped playing in high school. But yeah, that was like my first sense of competition. And then when that fizzled out, I became more serious with Pokemon because I'm always a very competitive guy. I'm a sore loser. I really do hate losing. So to this day, I'll use this as my main competitive outlet.
You mentioned you played first on Pokemon Online. Me too. And that was probably when Gen 5 was current. Was that your first competitive format?
So in 2011, I began playing. I actually, a fellow YouTuber who is ancient, who you probably never heard of, called Slowflake, like Snowflake, but with an L instead of an N. A Canadian Let's player. He played like the Pokemon games and he talked about them while he played them. He also talked about other things he did too, and he played competitive Pokemon. So I heard of Smogon through him on my like iPod Touch in the fourth or the fifth grade, and then eventually I was like, well, I'm old enough to where I can try this, and I tried it and it stuck. I actually started when I was under the age of 13, and there's a rule called COPA where you're not allowed to play for under 13. So for like my first couple years playing, I lied about my age and said I was like 10 years older, and I had this whole backstory.
Yeah.
But just by the way I talked, it was obviously not true. And eventually, like I fessed up, and I became somewhat known on Pokemon Online, and then that became to decline. And as Generation 5 became 6 and 6 became 7, I became a man Stan Smogon, and now, here we are.
Yeah, I'm curious how the transition was between you just being a player first starting into becoming like, I guess, an authority figure in the Smogon community.
It's a great question.
How did that happen?
This is a twofold answer, if you don't mind. Because I actually became an authority figure first on Pokemon Online. Ironically enough, I lead OU and NU on Smogon now. I led both those tiers on Pokemon Online when I was like 15, 16 years old back in Generation 6 when Pokemon Online was still kind of on its last legs. And then I started playing in tournaments on Smogon, and they kind of knew I had some pedigree and I was younger, so I was probably going to be around for a while. So some people came up to me, and some people saw my attitude was mostly good, sometimes very bad, but mostly good. And I began posting in 2016 when I first began college in real life. I got added to the OU Council for the start of Generation 7. My friend TDK actually was one of the tier leaders back then, or one of the people on the council. He added me. He also added Blunder, who was council back then, who a lot of you guys may know in Crashing Boom Bang as well. They were really awesome presidents on the council as well, and ultimately they fizzled out because they've been doing a million one other things, as you know, with Blunder. But I stuck around. I really love the nature of tiering discussions, the precedent that factors into things, the philosophical bits to it, and helping evolve our community, because that's just something that's always piqued my interest. I did like things like debate club when I was younger as well, so it kind of fit into my roots a little bit. And then after a while, between the fact that I'd been on council for a while and I was one of the more transparent public guys, between doing things like YouTube and posting a lot in public spaces, I was pretty well known between that and tournaments. So I eventually adopted tier leadership when ABR stepped down and just started Generation 8. And now, here we are. I'm definitely here. I was here for all Generation 8. I'm going to be here for hopefully the entirety of Generation 9. And beyond that, I don't know. I mean, I'm an older guy now for the community. I'm in my mid-20s now, but I love it here. And it's definitely been, a long time coming, but I'm really glad to be where I am. And I feel I give the community a great chance to, be interactive with the council, which wasn't always the case before. But I also think there are so many great minds for the game and great tiering minds as well that I'm sure one day there'll be another tier leader, and he's awesome too. But it was an awesome process getting here, and I'm just excited to, continue making a difference.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of hard work, like writing up all those analyses every week or so that you have to do that.
It's funny you say that, because this week in particular was hard hitting, because I had the closure of the suspect test one day, then the suspect vote the next day, then the verdict like 2 or 3 days later, and then right after that I wrote like a full article for Smogon forums on the verdict, and the next day I wrote up the whole radar, and now we'll work on writing up ban posts, which we'll get to in a little bit, because a couple things are going to be getting banned from the metagame. But yeah, it felt like weeks like this, it's almost like a job, but I actually enjoy what I'm writing about, so it's not like a job so much as it's just an intensive hobby. But there are other times where it's a lot more manageable, and once we get past the early stage, it's going to be a lot easier, and we'll be able to breathe. So I'm not too worried about it,
What is your general, I guess this is kind of a complex question, but what is your general philosophy on Pokemon balance, and what makes a good competitive experience and a balanced format, like in a general sense?
So there are 2 ways I love looking at it. The first one is, in the most general premise, is that the better player in a game should win more often than not if it's competitive. That's kind of more of a textbook exemplary definition, if you will. Better player can take so many different meanings, though, and that makes tiering, break down into so many different subsets and philosophies and precedents that make it more complicated. So the more specific ways I like looking at it is, when I'm team building, I shouldn't feel overly hamstrung, overly limited by any singular presence. There are going to be Pokemon that require a pool of checks, as opposed to, anything can just check or counter it. But I shouldn't have to, be able to basically count on my hand, if I'm facing Chi-Yu, I have to use one of these 3 Pokemon, or I'm just going to outright lose the game or be at a major disadvantage. So from team building, I actually like looking at it the most, just because that's kind of an easy way to tell what's overpowered, what's broken, what's not. But then the other thing is, if something adds, too much inherent variance to a game outside of player control, i.e. things that are uncompetitive. In past generations, we banned evasion, or things even like Quick Claw have been banned a couple of tiers, Bright Powder, just things like those. Shadow Tag is another thing, because switching is an inherent part of the game we play, and we've kind of made a ruling in that, stuff like that. So I think you kind of break it down into 2 camps, and the broken camp, and I tend to use the team builder test for that when I'm going through the building checklist, saying, okay, I have much less Pokemon that can handle this than all of the alternatives. And then I also use the when it comes to uncompetitive things, I just use, that's actually harder for me, because like Pokemon is inherently like variant oriented. Focus Blast can miss, Scald can burn, but when it comes to things that are really outside of player choice, like there's no way I can switch if I'm facing a Shadow Tag Gothitelle, for example, like things like that. So I'd say you can kind of break it down into those 2 camps of broken and competitive, and that helps limit it a bit more and compare to alternatives a bit more, and then you can distinguish it. But it's hard, since what certain players view as broken is different. So for example, right now in the council we have 9 players. I'm probably a bit more liberal in terms of like, I'm okay banning things, especially earlier on in the generation, because we could always retest them. Other people maybe a tad more conservative in what they would consider ban worthy, and even like would not vote it. So we have a high threshold. You need basically 7 of the 9 members, over 2/3, to vote for something to be quick ban. Otherwise, if it gets a decent amount of support, it'll probably go to a suspect test. So that's kind of how we naturally keep each other in check and have some balances. But it's certainly not a perfect system. We're always working out the kinks of it. But yeah, generally speaking, I like breaking it down into broken and uncompetitive, and then trying to just do a little bit of head math, a little bit of feel through, a lot of gameplay and team building, and that'll help me draw the best perspective I can.
Cool. Yeah, that was a really good response. It is interesting. People have different philosophies on what is broken and what's not. Like
Definitely.
something like Landorus T. It's so high usage, so prolific and competitive, but you can't describe that as broken. It's just a Pokemon that does a lot of stuff in one slot, so that's why a lot of people run it. But then you look at something like Dracovish, that's a broken Pokemon because it's broken for a very 1D reason of it's got this one insane move that warps the tier completely around it.
Yeah. And I think it's funny, the Landorus T example, because the thing about Landorus T is it's one of the most common Pokemon because it arguably is needed last generation for things like Zeraora and Tapu Koko and even Excadrill. But if you look at facing Landorus T, there are a ton of things that would check or counter Landorus T and its common sets, Buzzwole and Slowbro and Rotom Wash and even opposing Landorus T and Ferrothorn and Weavile, all these things that Landorus T was never ever a case of something that was broken or overpowered, not in Generation 8 at least. But despite that, it saw the most usage, and I think that's just because usage and brokenness, or even usage and viability, there's not a perfect correlation. In fact, there's not even always any correlation at all, and I think that's a common misconception. And something that is used a lot isn't necessarily a problem so much as it might be a solution. But that's a hard conversation to have with some people who aren't necessarily natural team builders, because they don't understand that you need this to patch up X, Y, and Z. And when it comes to something like Dracovish, you basically had to use a water absorb Pokemon or Baneful Bunker, physically defensive, Toxapex, plus a Revenge Killer. And that was just so crazy. I didn't want to use Seismitoad on every single team on Seismitoad is otherwise an NU Pokemon. I didn't want to have to use, nonsense. And it got out of hand really quickly, so we banned it. But obviously, if you look at things in a vacuum, Landorus T had more usage than Dracovish at its peak. But Dracovish, when it was used, had such a stronghold on team building that it had greater effect, if that makes sense.
Yeah, usage and brokenness are different things. And I feel that way about Great Tusk in the current meta. Not a Pokemon that's broken in the sense that it's gonna demand responses to it, but it's so high usage because it has such has such good tools against Goldengo, and has just a general soft check to so many different things. Spin and knock.
It not only is a soft check, but it also has utility with knockoff and it's a knockoff and rapid spin and stealth rock. So
we do need Pokemon like that. Tinglu is a similar one that just handles 100 different things.
Yeah, I love Tinglu. Probably my favorite new Pokemon, by the way.
It might be my most used new Pokemon because I feel like it just helps.
I think I use Tusk a little more, but yeah, it's top 2.
So I wanted to ask you what your favorite OU format of all time is. I think I might know the answer, but
no, you're gonna assume it's black and white OU, but it's not. And
really, okay,
yeah. So advanced overuse Generation 3 is, in my opinion, the golden standard for a competitive Pokemon. Not back then, because back then competitive Pokemon wasn't as widespread, but rather modern advanced overused, which it has a lot of amazing players that have been around for a while now and very respectable, but also it's just so balanced, so competitive. I feel like the better player wins a lot. I don't think it's as fishy with all the thunder paralysis and trying to get critical hits and boosting wars like GSC. I don't think it's as overly power corrupt for a non-preview metagame like DPP. And then I think every single preview generation has its own subset of issues. Black White is probably my second or third favorite, and I love Black and White OU, and I've always been a metagame I thrive the most in, but there are some inherent issues, and a lot of it is almost the fact that it's evolved into a slightly broken checks broken. For example, we have these Sand Spike teams, and you need that Tyranitar and that Ferrothorn to check things like Latios, because that's why Latios is broken, but also Spikes plus Magic Guard, which is kind of the natural counter, is broken in its own right. And I personally am okay with that because it's aged so well and people know it's good, but it does limit, possibilities. We've seen a recent wave of things that have kind of at least shake things up a little bit, and I like how Black White's evolving. But no, I think ADV Generation 3 again is the golden standard. If you ever get in have spare time and you want to find peak Pokemon, look at games in ADVOU on the end of the ADV circuit at the end of every year, or in Smogon Premier League, the tournament that's coming up. And there are so many amazing games, amazing teams, amazing players. I will never get bored of Advanced Overused and the player base of it. I will definitely have times where I get frustrated with Black and White because it is a little variance heavy. It is a little repetitive and a little broken checks broken. But I'd say Black and White gets an honorable mention, and also a very unpopular take. Generation 8, in my opinion, the way Generation 8's metagame ended was actually very balanced. A lot of people didn't find it fun. I did like that metagame at the end. Not at the beginning very much, but once everything was out and we banned the crazies, I did like it at the end. So yeah, I'd say those are my top 3.
I'm glad you said that because I'm a huge ADVOU fan. It's my main format. I think it is definitely the gold standard for Pokemon. It's the most balanced Pokemon format ever. It's also not too like set in stone where the meta has cycles. A lot of stuff shifts in viability, and that's, I think, emblematic of a healthy metagame where it's got this concrete set of options, but then there's trends, stuff changes. Even though the format itself, nothing's getting banned or anything. Like ADVOU has been mostly the same for ages, but what's used changes all the time because
incremental stuff like the time pass, yeah.
There's a perfect balance of like threats and different responses to those threats and different ways for a creative player to take advantage of the tools they have. I really love it.
I couldn't agree.
And I think more people should watch it. I think it's very watchable. It's kind of easy to understand like what a good play is, what a good sequence is and stuff. Sometimes Pokemon can be a bit hard to watch for a new player, but
yeah, and it's weird because a lot of people like consider 1, 2, and even like 3 as like really solid generations, but ADV is very like progress laden. Like even games that go out like 70, 80 turns, you tend to see a lot of spikes, a lot of sand, a lot of progress. Combine Pokemon, trapping to remove things like Tyranitar or Blissey or even Jirachi, for example. Aerodactyl late in the game or Gengar with the right settings. There's a lot of ways to incentivize like progress and good sequences that it's never gonna bore you like a Generation 1 or 2 game might.
Yeah, exactly. But also, offensive Pokemon don't have super powerful tools. Most of the coverage options are just like hidden power, low BP moves.
Yeah.
Like the strongest move is like Meteor Mash or something, 100 power.
Yeah, either a choice banded Meteor Mash or Rock Slide is like, up there probably.
There is like super OP Boom, but I actually kind of like OP
but
Boom.
Explosion has a certain opportunity cost that obviously differentiates it.
Yeah. All right. My next question involves, I did an interview with BKC, who you probably know, and he has been on councils in the past, been involved in Pokemon discourse, and he made the comparison that, these Pokemon debates and discourse and even the process of getting stuff done in councils reminds him of like real life bureaucracy and like actually getting stuff done in real situations. I don't know, whether it be at work or whatever. What do you think of that? Do you sometimes get frustrated with the process of like, I don't know, you have a certain view of how things should be balanced, but then people in the council disagree and there's a whole process of it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's I'm gonna take a shot at an institution. It's we run at a much smaller scale than the government of the United States, the country I live in, but we run more efficiently than it. But jokes aside, I'm not trying to play the politics card here. Jokes aside, yes, it certainly has natural checks and balances. It certainly has procedure and is based off of precedent, like a law institution or like something that's making important decisions, even like a business. And I've always viewed my position almost like a CEO or like a top officer in a large public company, and I viewed my players as stakeholders in that my operations are intended to better their experience and potentially, I there's no money involved obviously, but like I'd say in the analogy, their experience, their ability to enjoy the game and deem it competitive is kind of akin to profit, whereas my ability to execute that and make that possible with my decisions, is kind of like how a company would make, business dealings or a government would institute laws in a sense. And obviously it's not a perfect comparison because what I'm doing is entirely volunteer work and what they're doing is largely just hobbyism. But at the same time, yes, it does function in the same way. No, we're not as professional. No, this isn't a job, but I do kind of love that feel of it because again, like I'm a little bit of a dork. I love debating when I was younger. I love the fact that I can be like a bit of a man of the people and have a platform. I have 5,000 followers on Twitter right now, and I love the fact that I can like wake up and like one day I'll post a meme about Pokemon, the next day I'll post like a serious thought about tiering, and I'll be interacting with hundreds of people that are like-minded. I love that, and in a sense, I'm kind of dealing with my constituents. I'm kind of dealing with a player base that is basically like stakeholders in a stock or shareholders, whatever you want to put it. And It's interesting because it could also get scary when things don't go well and people get very upset. But it's also so rewarding, and it always makes it worthwhile for me because I don't mind dealing with criticism. I have hundreds of people bashing me in the YouTube comments as we have this video, I'm sure, because they can do that. That's part of, the free world. People are entitled to say what they want. But I definitely love that, and I agree with BKC's analogy. And in general, I really do love BKC. He's a treasure. He's probably a little bit out of his heyday, his max activity in terms of Pokemon play, but I still see him around. I love him. I love talking to him. He's a great guy. I've actually met him in real life a few times. He's a really nice person.
I think he signed up for SPL. I'm not sure. I saw people
He
talking
did
about.
sign up, which was awesome. Only for Generations 3 and 4, I believe. But yeah, no, I am excited to see what he does.
And like competitive singles is a very unique competitive game. I don't think any other game has a system like this with accounts and all this stuff. Like maybe stuff like not all competitive scenes are endorsed by the company that made the game. Like there's Smash Bros. That's completely community run, but then their community doesn't really have this where they have shifting rule sets and like they have to ban stuff consistently. Like the game is just kind of the game. They have the rule set, but they don't have to consistently like debate about what to do. This is a really unique thing, and some people kind of dislike it because it's unofficial. It's not endorsed by Nintendo. There is VGC, but at the end of the day, if like Game Freak is not investing effort and time into balancing the singles experience, someone has to. I guess the community has to.
It's tough because no one really has like an apt comparison to Smogon in the gaming world. There's no singles community like this in Pokemon. In other games, they tend to either latch onto official titles and don't have the same level of inherent balancing or don't need it, or their sub communities haven't really gained the standing that Smogon has, and we haven't really been able to analyze and compare their structures internally. Smogon is kind of one in its own, and that makes this experiment that keeps going very interesting. In last generation, when we banned Dynamax, there was a humongous amount of backlash throughout sub-communities on YouTube, on Twitter, Reddit, etc. But I think everyone who plays the game kind of came to an understanding that it needed to be done. In this generation with Terastallization, we had a similar type of ordeal, but it wasn't as broken. And, just seeing these rippling effects go on, and this is like a first. Like, we've never had conversations. We've never had votes like this before. And there's no akin to it. There's no other game that has things like this. And I'm sure in the future, as more games come out, more games are released, more communities are born, it will happen. But I'm kind of interested not only because Smogon right now is individual, it's unique, but also this could be like setting groundwork for future gaming communities that might be looking back at this in 5, 10, 15 years. And just knowing I have that role and I'm one of the faces of that is very humbling and something why I take this job so seriously. And I will use my platform, not only to have jokes and make new friends, but also for the sake of things that are going to be preserved in basically gaming lore, gaming history, if you will. And I know that maybe sounds a bit dramatic and maybe like inflating my importance of my role, but I do think it matters a lot. I think a lot of people care too, and they might care down the line. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think even some other competitive games could have a system like a suspect test for an official competitive format or something, where maybe like
it's just that
a card game.
A lot of game creators are kind of like, oh no, my game is meant to be played as we made it. Like, that's why VGC doesn't have bans, and VGC just kind of goes by their official rule set. Like, it's almost like people who create the games aren't, they want to stand by it, and that's fine, but that's not always going to lead to a balanced product. Like, in my opinion, doubles is a lot easier to balance than singles. So VGC will always be very playable. But like, if there was a VGC singles equivalent, they would either have to have bans or it would be riddled with variants. So
there's also the issue of, because it's the official format, they obviously design new mechanics and systems with the competitive doubles experience in mind rather than competitive singles, which they don't even acknowledge as a thing.
Yeah, like Dynamax and Terastallization are both wholly built for doubles. Yeah. But we can still tier them in singles if it works, but there's always the chance, like with Dynamax, where it doesn't work. So yeah.
And 6v6 singles is obviously a completely different experience to doubles. So I think 100%. Even if it's not their vision and what they're designing around in the process of development, it's not an invalid way to play at all. It's like it's been played for so long. Yeah. It used to be the main way to play in the old gens. So
yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any right or wrong way to play. I think that it's awesome that VGC exists, and Smogon has its own doubles formats, and PS has even a VGC ladder, and I love that. And there's a ton of more decision making, and I think the people who play that game in that mode are really, really very intelligent, and the way that they explain their games, it's so coherent and awesome. But I also think singles has its own merits, and it's great, and I think that as a community we should accept each other. But unfortunately, a lot of stray, like, official official favoring people, they don't love Smogon. And unfortunately, in response to that, some Smogon people don't love VGC, and I think that's all silly. I think we should accept each other. We all love Pokemon. We all love having to have. We all love the community. Why should there be division? It's just a different game, and the fact that we have everything, we have Smogon, but we also have an official circuit, official format like VGC. I personally love it all. So
yeah, I think there should be a bit more like community unity. Maybe even we should try the other. Like we should try VGC. They could try singles. I don't know. I tried VGC.
yeah,
It's
I mean,
cool.
a lot of VGC players have played Smogon. Like for example, right now my Smogon Premier League manager Zamog and Shilo, both of them are actually playing in San Diego as we speak at the regionals. Omog
Oh, yeah.
is 7-0. He's going to top cut, and Shilo is not far behind either. He's 5-2, and it's so awesome seeing them very common singles players playing that as well. So I think it's awesome we have some crossover. Guys like Nails as well. So yeah.
Yeah, even though the different experiences, it's still Pokemon. You know all the mechanics. It's a different environment. Different
Yep.
stuff's viable. But like I tried VGC and it wasn't too bad. Like I got used to it.
Yeah, I'm trying to work on a video right now that's like some clickbaity title, like, "Oh, singles cheerleader tries doubles for first time." I've played like unofficially like a little bit, but I want to like play on the ladder and like like have a bunch of people comment like, "Oh, you're doing all these things wrong," and I think it'll draw a decent crowd to my channel. But I'm
Yeah.
probably not gonna be very good just because it's such a skill intensive metagame, and I haven't built that skill up as much as my singles skills, of course.
That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah,
I'd watch
it's
it.
gonna be funny.
So, speaking of Gen 9, what do you think of the metagame so far and all the discourse surrounding it, how it's shaping up? The, new Pokemon?
I don't love the metagame. A lot of people do love it. In fact, public perception is really high because we didn't ban Terastallization. Everyone wants to see the mechanics stay. I don't love it, but it comes with a caveat. I think I'm gonna love it very soon. Some action is coming that I'm gonna get to in a minute, if that's all right. But I think that right now we're in a playable metagame because we banned the most egregious things, and now a lot of cores, a lot of balance, a lot of commonality is developing. We know what to prepare for in the team builder, and that's awesome because the first thing is you got to know what you're doing before it becomes anything that's balanced. And now we know what we're doing, but I think that there's some things that really limit what you can do still in the builder, in the battle, etc. But I guess I'm gonna drop a reveal right now if that's okay with you.
Go for it.
We're gonna be quick banning 3 of the most oppressive Pokemon via council vote. Chi-Yu is going to be the one that came unanimously. Everyone that played the game pretty much knew that had to go. It's essentially 197 base special attack when you consider its ability. So that being out of there is a huge burden off team building already. And then we're also going to be removing Cyclizar and Annihilate. Annihilate with Rage Fist was just so crazy. I think that once the metagame becomes more saturated with threats with the release of Home, actually Annihilate will be more balanced. We'll have more ways to evade it defensively and pressure it offensively. But right now, with the limited metagame, it's very hard because it runs Taunt. So slower Pokemon are basically forced to attack it or switch out. But faster Pokemon are normally frailer and can't deal with it. So you're basically forced to boost Rage Fist or walk like on a very tight rope, basically. And that's tough. And Cyclizar, against like slower, more passive teams, you could basically pick your poison like it's a free substitute. And it has Regenerator, so I could do that 4, 5, 6 times during the course of a game. And that's made offensive teams really impossible, and it made it so the metagame developed super unevenly. So I think basically we're gonna have some quality of life choices, and I think it's really cool because right now the main ways of checking Chi-Yu and keeping Annihilate in check are extremes. You either have to use like really hyper offensive teams that can just make it so that Chi-Yu only gets in once or twice, or really bulky teams that have like Blissey or like even like a Tyranitar stall I've seen here and there that can make it so that Chi-Yu can't break you unless it's like specs and it boosts its Terastallization. And if you're getting that, at least it's some opportunity cost, So I think we're going to start to see more bulky offense, more regular offense, more balanced teams. And then we'll see a metagame that is nowhere like other generations because we've got so many new toys, but one that everyone can play and say, my game wasn't ruined by a single Pokemon. And Annihilate, same boat there. You either have to use like a specific unaware stall with like Salt Cure Chip and Rocky Helmet, Guard Chomp, stuff like that, or really offensively like overbearing, pressuring stuff so that you can't like let Rage Foost get too boosted. So I'm very excited about once the metagame goes from more extremes, so we see a lot more bulky offense, a lot more straight offense and balanced teams, as opposed to just, we're going to be seeing Cyclizar, Grimmsnarl screens, or we're going to be seeing reactionary type of stuff for offense, but the offense is going to have a bunch of holes, So with these 3 bans, I'm hoping that we can actually proceed. And the good thing is that once these are gone, there's nothing that's like super overwhelmingly broken. You could argue things like Espathra, Shenpao, and we're going to have suspect tests because in anything that's not like very like clearly busted because we had at least 7 of 9 councilmen vote on these things. The community should decide, and even these Pokemon, the community is going to probably decide on when it comes to Pokemon Home, which is going to be kind of like the true birth of the metagame. This is kind of like a first chapter of what could be a 3 or 4 chapter saga, if you will. But so basically, right now I'd say the metagame's a 3 or a 4 out of 10. In 2 days' time, it'll be like a 5 or a 6 out of 10, and I think we're going to be reaching like a 7 or an 8. And then Home's going to come around, and everything's going to be crazy. So we'll obviously speak to that at a later date. But yeah, so I don't love it right now, but it's playable. But I think it's going to get better soon because of some action, some normalcy, some more development, and that's basically how I feel.
Yeah, I made a video yesterday about the on the radar post, and I was pretty certain Chi-Yu would go, but I wasn't as sure about Annihilate and Cyclizar, because some people like Annihilate, and Cyclizar, I thought that Chi-Yu and Annihilate both should be banned, but Cyclizar I was less sure on because there is a bit of counterplay to it. It's
unique.
It is unique. It's kind of annoying. Like, I don't like it. I think it's stupid, but also I haven't been as oppressed by it as I was by Chi-Yu and Annihilate, where I'm kind of like, it's demanding so much of me. It's kind of constraining team building so much. Yeah, I guess I get where he's coming from, where it is leading the metagame down this certain path that enhances like these kind of 1D setup screen teams that are not very interesting.
No. And also, I feel like the reason why half the Pokemon were on the radar is Cyclizar. For example, Espathra largely benefits from the substitute from Cyclizar to free entry. Dragonite, if it has multi-scale and a substitute up, that's 2 free turns. Plus, you could change your type with Terra. That's basically 3 free turns. So if you don't have an unaware Pokemon, you're in trouble. Even Annihilate loves that free turn, that free bulk up. So that, I think that dictates a ton. With that said, though, I think Cyclizar was least broken to the 3. It actually only got 7 out of 9 votes, so while it did get 77.7% support, the other 2 got 8 and 9 votes out of 9. So that it was the closest, but I think if you went to Suspect, it would have been close, but probably got banned. The other 2 would have been pretty much unanimous. So, I definitely think Cyclizar will exist in OU probably longer later this generation, because right now the passive Pokemon that exist, the Garganacles of the world, the Tinglus of the world, if they don't have Whirlwind, even things like Toxapex, Rotom Wash, Slowking, Bulky Waters, they can't really use a move that could universally break a substitute if you've got a couple of different typed offensive Pokemon on your team. So, for example, if you have Cyclizar and you have, say, a Dragonite and a Spathra and a Nasty Plot Goldango, you can basically pick which Pokemon you want to have a sub if you can get a turn right. Or even you might, with Multi-Scale Dragonite, or if Screen Drop, you might be able to do it regardless. And that free turn right there basically forces you to use something like Unaware, or forces you to use Phasing. And that's a heavy restrictor in a metagame that is just lacking in options. And that's something that where I go back to what I said before about in the team builder. If I feel like I've only got a very small amount of options relative to everything else, then my teams are all going to start looking the same. Cyclizar forced a lot of offense to look the same because it built around it, and it forced a lot of bulky teams to look the same just because you had to run specific cores. That's why we saw so much, Dondozo teams, and we saw so much of the Skeldridge, which I actually love Skeldridge, by the way. But it's not a coincidence why unaware Pokemon were so good and why that specific offense was so good. So I think we're going to see less patterns, less of the same, and more variants. We're going to be kind of doing addition by subtraction, if you will, and I love that.
Yeah, that's a good argument. And it's such a unique Pokemon to be banned. Usually Pokemon that are banned are insane offensive powerhouses. This is like a utility Pokemon that just has every option in the world that is enabling all this stuff. It's kind of cool in that way that was banned.
I do think it's cool, and I do think it's a Pokemon that'll probably end a generation in OU. As crazy as it sounds now as I'm quick banning it, kind of kicking myself right now because I have it on like 40% of my teams. But yeah. I do think right now metagame a little one-dimensional, so I don't love that.
Pokemon Home's going to be crazy. The power creep.
Yeah. Pokemon Home is going to be crazier than the last 2 months were, and the last 2 months were the craziest month in Pokemon history, so be ready.
So the decision on how to handle Terra must have been a pretty tough one because, you're under a bit of time pressure. SPL's coming up, and it's such a divisive issue. There were many possible solutions. And there's also more than one problem in the metagame. Like there's Terra, and then there's, Chi-Yu as a clearly broken ape is a problem, which you've now dealt with. But I guess I want to ask, like, how do you decide what to prioritize first? Like, maybe some people said, oh, you should have banned Chi-Yu first, because obviously Chi-Yu was crazy. But I think, like, the Chi-Yu hate actually came about after, like, the Terra discussion was more prominent. I don't know. I think, like, the metagame's still evolving, and it's hard to identify what is the biggest problem in this crazy new gen where, like, there's so much broken stuff to, like, where do you even begin? So yeah, how do you make these decisions?
It's hard. Leading last generation was pretty easy for me, not because it was an easy metagame or because it was like always fun, but because the decisions kind of scream to you. And that, like, oh, we had to get Dracovish out of the tier. Oh, Kirim Black with Dragon Dance turns out to be very good. You know, things like that. Even later on, things like Kirim, you know, it became clear that it stood out in the context of the metagame. Leading this generation, not instinctually sound. No, it's everyone has different opinions. Terastallization has been by far the most polarizing issue. I'm friends with a lot of players who are top on the ladder or top in tournaments, whatever. And I have many of them that think, oh, Terastallization should never be touched, and some of them think it should be outright banned. That any decision I make is gonna instantly be hated on by some people and loved by other people. It could be a restriction, it could be a ban, it could be kept entirely. Always someone's gonna be upset, and right off the bat, that's like an unfortunate thing. So right off the bat, I've been basically throwing out public perception and just focusing on the metagame basically like a baby to me. I've made this analogy in private before. It might sound extreme, but like the metagame is kind of like a baby I'm trying to nurse to health, essentially. It's crazy, but it is, because you got to be so careful. And when it came to quick bans versus suspect, terastallization versus things like Chi-Yu, it basically came down to this. We had two radars, which I know you know what a radar is. You have video on your channel. A radar is essentially, we're going to tell the public what Pokemon we're looking at, and then the council is going to have a vote on it a couple days later. And that led to 4 bans. The first 4, Fluttermane, Houndstone, Iron Bundle, and Palafin. In that order, basically. And then nothing else got enough support for a quick ban from the council on those votes, or when we did a community survey, which we surveyed not only the general public, but also people who were doing well either on the ladder or in the release tournament. So we had a good data sample, because I like data-driven approaches rather than just judging off of YouTube comments and Twitter and feel like that. And from that, we determined that since nothing, during the survey, by the way, even Chi-Yu didn't get enough support for a quick ban. Other Pokemon included, like a Spathro, Goldengo, they didn't either, nothing did. We determined then we were going to open Terastallization discussions, and that basically led us on a path to where we could fit a suspect that was a week longer than normal, because we wanted to give people more time to discuss Terastallization, and B, quick bans before SPL, which is the Smogon Premier League, before OST, the official Smogon tournament, and before a point in January where we still have 3 to 4 months before home. So it wasn't just based off of any one tournament. It was just based off of a reasonable timeline, basically. We wanted to have room for a longer suspect that overlapped with the holidays, because we knew a lot of people would be finishing finals, and we knew a lot of people would be coming home. So this way they've got an extra week to ladder. And we also knew that would give us time for a quick ban right after. So it was very careful. I literally took out like a Google Calendar, and I like marked the days and like everything I should be doing and mapped it all out. And like I have like layers of organization that I keep largely private behind the scenes, but it was something we thought about and I discussed a ton at length. I crossed it not only with my council, with some other tier leaders, with our tiering admin, Shilo, who I'm good friends with. I actually met with in real life a week or 2 back, and we didn't discuss just that, but a number of other things. And it basically became an obsession of mine just to optimize our process and timing, because there was no right answer. There was no wrong answer. Even how we did the suspect, the exact amount of time, the exact thresholds, the way we did the vote, which was completely unique and novel to Pokemon, it was something that we discussed and workshopped a ton, and people argue with how it was done. And they have some valid arguments, but there was no perfect solution. Some people are always going to be alienated and pissed off given their opinions, and that's just something we have to accept. But from there, we knew that we could hold more quick bans after the suspect test was over, because we've essentially had an extra month of time that there were no quick bans in the metagame still in its infancy. So that way we can have one major suspect echoing the timeline we did last generation after quick bans, and then go back to quick bans on most obvious things, and then get into a normal suspecting rhythm. So it, in a sense, took from last generation, in a sense, just made sense with the calendar. and in a sense just was the ultimate consensus of a lot of discussion and me racking my brain at 3 a.m. while eating Cheez-Its and staring at my computer screen. That's really all there is to it. And when I say that's all there is to it, I know that means there's a lot to it, but I hope that makes some sense and gives some perspective and some clarity. And if you have specific questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I'm very transparent about open books, so yeah.
Yeah, I think the survey was a good idea. And I'm sure like the way you're handling this is sort of been, informed by like the past where, maybe in like, obviously in Gen 5, that was so long ago, Smogon was more in its infancy a little bit. So that was such a broken metagame and there was so much like issues back then. And there was even, by the end of it, it was still in such a crazy state. So you have that to look back on for like, okay, what can we do better this time? And even Gen 7 was another meta where like Z moves were controversial and there were all these like Majourna and Kartana, all these crazy Pokemon were there. I wasn't as involved in that gen, but I feel like I saw a little bit of like people upset with how that one was handled.
I didn't like how Gen 7 was handled. And I was on the council, so.
Right.
Can I actually go into detail on that if you don't mind?
Sure, go for it.
I know it's a little off topic. So, in my opinion, entire leadership that predated me had a more conservative stance on tiering. I have the exact opposite. I think that not only should we be more proactive in suspect tests, but we need to involve the community, involve the community as much as possible. That's why I'm engaging people on Twitter and YouTube. That's why I have all these surveys. I'd hop in the OU room like, hey, people, what do you think about this? I read these discussion threads. Before that, those were never referenced in the council, and that was a big problem to me because, again, we've got this stakeholder analogy where we're basically holding all this power over hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of people in their enjoyment of a hobby. We have to include those people if they want to be included. And some people are just going to sit on the sideline and complain, and some people aren't going to understand well enough to contribute to like a productive discussion. But even if it's only 10 or 15 or 20% of the player base, that's still hundreds of untapped players that can vote in suspects and include themselves in the tiering process. So just because my council in Generation 7 maybe didn't have enough support, ABR, in my opinion, should have still lobbied for another suspect or two. Personally, I wanted a suspect on Kartana and Mega Mawile. Mega Mawile aged horribly. It's not actually very common in the metagame. It's become a little too slow for what's in fashion, but Kartana with Normalium Z, Choice Band, Choice Scarf has been a little overbearing, so I think SM between that and maybe Manaphy, which is more a product of things that developed after the game with Rain, probably could be looked into. And I think we should have had a Kartana suspect during the generation. But again, this is why Generation 8, in my opinion, was handled better than Generation 7. We had more proactive suspects. When it was 6 suspects in Generation 7, we had like twice as many in Generation 8. And I imagine we're going to have even more in Generation 9 if it lasts similarly long. So, it's just about getting the community involved. And that's what I care about the most. And I don't think we did that as much back then. ABR is someone I'm good friends with. I've met in real life. He's a great guy. I really do enjoy him. He's been involved with all sorts of controversy, tiering-wise and otherwise. But he's just a little more anti-ban skewed than I think someone who should be representative of the whole community should be. And I think we need someone that's more in the middle, and that's kind of where I tend to stand. And I also know that I'm okay being wrong or being in the minority so long as the community can decide. And my opinion should only be just one guy's opinion, not the whole deciding factor, if you will. So I just think we kind of cleaned up a little bit and knew that we needed to involve our community more, and we reflected that in our process.
Yeah, I like the way you're handling it in Gen 9. Even though it's a broken metagame, I like the community involvement. Feels really good, and
yes, I appreciate that.
It's so cool that so many people got the requirements for the suspect vote. Like a lot of people
more
did.
Than ever, yeah.
And it's because there was more of a reason to. If it was Dynamax, I didn't feel like going for that because I was pretty sure it would be banned. It was such an obvious thing. Terra was more.
If Dynamax didn't get banned, the metagame would have been awful.
Yeah.
With Terra not being banned, the metagame is still going to be playable. It's not the same. And I do think, by the way, Team Preview would have been an awesome step, an awesome middle ground. But it's still playable. Not all is lost. And the people spoke. If more than 40% of the people didn't want a restriction, which was what happened, then we're going to pick up our things, even if we disagreed, and we're going to make the best metagame possible. And that's my job, so I'm doing that. And I love that job. I love the people that even had a different opinion to me, and I think that's okay. So I really do love where we're at.
Yeah, I do think reveal types would have been a bit better, but especially because there's the precedent of VGC literally also doing that. But I also think it's fine where you can, suss out what certain Terra types are based on how they're playing or their structures and stuff. It's not completely hidden info. It is like, There's some situations like Roaring Moon or something that can have multiple different Terra types, and there's also the random fringe Terra types that can catch you off guard and win games. But that's not like such a problem. I think it's all right.
I think that the more you play, the better. And also, like, Smogon itself is coming with some resources. Like, behind the scenes, I'm working on basically a post that lists every common Terra type on every Pokemon in the metagame. And you could, like, just open that and kind of use it as a cheat sheet, despite Team Preview not being there. So, like, there are ways, if you become more informed, to use your resources where you can basically not play as if there's Team Preview, but have, like, an idea, know what you're playing against, as opposed to just something completely bat crazy, if you will. And I think we're also going to have another suspect on Terra sometime after home, maybe it in May or June or July or August, whatever. And I think that probably is not going to result in an outright ban, because I don't think it needs an outright ban right now, and I don't know that it will then, but maybe that'll result in preview, or maybe the people will speak again and say, hey, we're going to keep Terra all generation, and maybe by then it'll be normalized. I don't know.
Yeah.
It really, a lot of that is going to depend on the court of public perception and how people feel, and I think people should continue to voice their opinions on Terra, on YouTube, on Smogon, on Pokemon Showdown, etc. And we're just gonna keep rolling with the best metagame we know how to have, and it's gonna be fun, guys. I'm really excited, and I hope you are too. So,
even though I maybe would have preferred revealed Terra, I think not revealing Terra also does add a layer where, a creative builder can use some fringe Terra type in some crazy situation to, like, the hidden info does add a layer, and it's kind of cool in another way.
Yeah,
So,
like, for example, I had a opponent who overpredicted and lost his Ting-Lu earlier on in the game, and I had a choice specs Dragapult, and I Terra ghosted so I could kill, like, a weakened Tox specs, and then they sent out another Pokemon that was, like, not gonna live a Shadow Ball. And I was like, oh, I guess they're just giving up. It's a free game, and they suddenly terastallized this random Pokemon. I want to say it was like an Iron Valiant that wasn't speed boosted or anything, and they terastallized it into a normal type to blank the spec Shadow Ball. Things like that are not commonly seen, innovative, creative usage that give you, like, another chance, and I think that's awesome.
yeah, and some might view that as variance, but that is creative, because that is a bad Terra type other than that one interaction, right? Like, that's kind of...
Yeah, like, if you have a team, like, you can patch more weaknesses, so there is some merit to that. Now, you could also say that's kind of a crapshoot, and you're basically banking on one specific scenario, but you basically have more say in the team builder and less say in the battle now than ever, in my opinion. And that's basically what the community is accepting. And I don't love that. I prefer, focusing on the play and less variance in play, and more so, focus on that and then team builder. But it's fine, because that's an active choice the community made, and I accept that, and we're going to try and make sure that the play component is normalized, so that's cool.
Yeah, definitely. One criticism I have of Smogon is that it can be a bit old-fashioned sometimes, and I think you have talked about that a little bit with, like, people having conservative attitudes in the council, but there's also other things like, the whole system of having a forum is kind of an old-fashioned thing, old internet, which I kind of like in some ways. It's a good place to discuss stuff. It's a better platform for that. One thing I do think is that the way tournaments are structured is a little bit old-fashioned, because I think, like, the average casual viewer doesn't really know about, like, the Smogon tournament scene. To me personally, I've played Pokemon Sims for a long time, but I found it a little bit difficult to get into the Smogon tournament scene. It's not really immediately obvious to a new player, I guess. What do you think about that?
I think it's fair to say that there's a disconnect between the general community and the tournament community. I also think that I don't know that there's a solution to the problem, unfortunately. We have tried using the Smogon Twitch to advertise tournaments, everything ranging from our Charity Bowl one-offs to just having, like, SPL Sundays on the Twitch. I've done that. Others have done that as well. And it just hasn't taken off as much as I'd like. But also, I think that part of it does not tell the full story. I think if you go on the PS in the OU room and ask about SPL, there'll be more people that know of it and just lurk in the shadows involved than you think. I actually think we still see a couple thousand people, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 people, just know about SPL, actively follow it, despite only a couple hundred participating, and I think that's cool. And I think a lot of the SPL things trickle down onto the ladder and affect the metagame too, and they find out about it more and more each time. But I still think that 4,000, let's just say as a number, for example, is still a fraction of the whole, 5 million OU battles we might have had last month, and 200,000 active players, and no way are we ever going to have everyone do that. Not even every VGC player knows about Worlds, for example. A lot of them just play for the sake of playing. But it should be a greater proportion. That proportion isn't where it is in other gaming communities. Forums are a dated concept, and not everyone who plays on PS knows what Smogon is. And the real answer to that is that people who unfortunately go a little over my head probably need to put a bit more money in and put a bit more advertising in and do a bit more narrative focusing. And unfortunately, that's not something that I'm not an advertiser. I'm not a narrative guy. I don't know what the best approach is to. But personally, I've been using my platform to share about tournaments and tiering and Smogon as much as I can, just because, in my opinion, it's the best place for competitive singles in the world. So why the hell not, And we've seen an uptick in exposure a ton. One thing I look at is the amount of views a thread has on Smogon. So, for example, right now, the metagame discussion thread opened on November 17th. Already has over 1 million views on Smogon. It took longer last generation for that to happen. It took 8 or 9 times as long for this to happen 2 generations ago, and so on and so forth. And if you just look at the release tournament, which was an unofficial tournament, which isn't supposed to get an exposure, that got more views than any other unofficial tournament has in Smogon history in this span of time. And SPL signups, a tournament we've alluded to before, the Smogon Premier League, had more signups than any other SPL before, despite being on a decline 3 or 4 years prior. We suddenly have the most we've had in ever, and we broke a 4 or 5 year downward trend. So I think the new generation's helping, and now we're more connected ever. We have more Smogon content creators. We have more Smogon social media presences, and I think we're reaching more people. So I think we're actually trending in the right direction. But no, we need to capture more people. Smogon can remain a forum. I don't think forums are too ancient. I think people are actually okay with forums. I more so think the structure, the advertising, the word of mouth campaigns, they need to be what improved. The internal infrastructure needs to improve. The spoken mouth, that needs to be done more. And I think more people are catching word of that. I think more content creators are getting involved. And, just people like Freezeye, for example. I think that's awesome. So I think we're heading in the right direction, but a lot of big steps need to be taken as opposed to miniature steps. So hopefully we'll get there. Smogon definitely has that issue, and I can't agree with your underlying sentiment more. I just think that it's going to take a lot of work, and I think that work needs to be done.
Yeah, and there is a lot of hype for this new gen, more than we've seen, and more people probably want to get into it. So I think we got to make it easier for them to do that. There's a lot of new attention. We got to make resources like this is how you sign up. These are what the tournaments are. They've got different formats and whatever. And even we could have more unofficial tournaments happen or more coverage for the tournaments on YouTube. I really love doing tournament commentary. I've done it for Gen 3. You've done it for SBL. I've seen your videos. They're good. We can put more emphasis on the tournaments as content creators and stuff. Yeah. And another thing I really liked was there was so much hype around that match between you and MudkipNerd, which was started as a joke, but then that's the kind of thing that people love to watch is a grudge match or a exhibition match with a bit of a storyline. I think that a lot of Pokemon players are interesting people. They have these storylines and personalities, but that doesn't really come out in the games. A commentator would have to make it interesting, or you'd have to market it a certain way. It's this and versus this. This is a match for the Smogon council spot. That was a novel idea that got a lot of people hyped about it because it was a little bit funny. And then, that was really cool. So I think we could see more exhibition matches like that, or hyping up tourneys in a similar way to that.
It's funny you say that because right now we're working on the fight nights. Last Sunday I played Freezeye. This Sunday we've got Ozma playing Temp, another YouTuber. We're just trying to build hype, have matches where we see 800, 900, 1,000 people watching at the same time, reacting like a tournament-like atmosphere. And with things like OST, the official Smogon tournament, and Smogon Tour right around the corner, which have Scarlet and Violet overused, we're going to hopefully, try and integrate some advertising into this and get more people involved in tournaments, or just more people following these big games. And suddenly we're going to have people that maybe were good ladder players transferring to tournaments. And that's so awesome, that overlap, because we should all be one community, PS or Smogon or whatever. We really should be more grouped together. So I'm working on that. I think the MudkipNerd thing brought a ton of people to the forums. It's been really, really hyped, and I actually love that match, and I'm going to try and hopefully do, more hype matches like that, even if they're more so for funny reasons, just because it'll get people talking, it'll get people watching. I mean, that MudkipNerd match between the two of them, almost 1 million people had some sort of impression on that match, be it watching a YouTube video, clicking a link, watching a replay, watching it live. It's crazy how many people this reached. people in casual Pokemon circles were talking about it in the group chats, texting their competitive Pokemon playing friends about it. I've heard from so many people that have had people find out about this. It's so crazy. And just knowing that my name has been involved in that much, it's definitely a little bit of almost an ego thing. Like, holy crap, this is bigger than me. This is bigger than Smogon. This is a universalized hobby, and it's so cool. And that just makes me more motivated to spread information about our tournaments and more hype matchups. And hopefully we can do things like break the record for most watched Pokemon Showdown game live in all time, and do things like expand on our community, because there's so much out there that is yet to be explored, and there are so many people out there that have so many things to offer that I'd love that.
I'm glad to hear that. I think that's a good way to go. I think, it's Pokemon's a fun game to watch. It's exciting in a very straightforward way. Most people are familiar with the game. I've always thought it had more potential than, the views or attention it got, at least singles. Even VGC could be better, like views-wise. It's like Pokemon's the biggest franchise in the world. And if you think about that, like VGC doesn't actually get that many views. They don't push it that much. I'm glad to see so much hype around stuff like that. Even your match versus Frieza, I watched those games. That was really cool. High-level games are just fun to watch. It's fun to hear your live commentary on that, the decision-making, even replay analysis stuff. And, if a historical example was like that classic Lavos Rage game in Gen 4. Like, that got a lot of attention because it became a little bit of a meme. There's like a storyline to that. There's like intrigue, That's what people want.
I don't actually love that one too much personally, because Lavos turned out to be a little bit of an unfortunate presence, and I don't love that, like, representing our whole community. But yeah. I love the fact that we have like these in-jokes, these memes that are being universalized, and people can start associating, because then they're like, oh, like, can I witness the next one? Like, what's going to be next? What can I do to like be part of this culture? Have these LOL in capital letters moments, be a part of these flooded chats, And I think that culture itself is cool, regardless of any individual anomaly, meme, if you will.
For sure. Yeah. Love to hear that. Love the direction you guys are taking Gen 9. Excited for the future.
Yeah, I think the hype battles aligning with the new generation is great, and I just hope we can keep it going until at least home, and then home will bring its own hype wave, and then maybe we could do it again. That'd be awesome.
What do you think are going to be the most meta-impacting Pokemon coming to Pokemon Home? Like, there's the Hisui Pokemon, returning Pokemon with new crazy signature moves. It's all good. Like, we have no idea, but like, what have you got your eye on? Is like, have you got any teams?
Heatran is the answer to the question, probably. I don't know the full list of the Pokemon that are going to be returning and staying OU. I don't. But Heatran is going to play a huge role in the metagame no matter what's banned or what's allowed, because it's Heatran. It's been a top 5 Pokemon in OU each of the last 2 generations, and a top 20 Pokemon in OU the last 4 generations, 5 generations even. So I'm curious to see what Pokemon will come. And once we know more, we will, be able to speak on it. But Heatran is going to be huge. I've heard things about the legendary birds. I think Heavy Duty Boots Zapdos is going to be great. I don't know if that's confirmed. There are some Pokemon like Genesect, which I could actually see starting in Ubers. I know maybe people won't want to hear that, but we've seen Pokemon go Ubers 3-4 straight generations, and those ones might actually start Ubers, but virtually everything else is probably going to end up starting out in OU, and I'm very excited for that. Maybe we'll see things like Lotties or Melmetal, things that have been like Kings of OU in prior generations. I'm really excited. I don't know if things like prior starters like Greninja will be allowed. I'd love to see that as well. I think Heatran's like my number 1 answer, if you will, but I would really love to see other like great Pokemon as well. For example, the legendary trio Zapdos, Moltres, Articuno, especially Zapdos, I think would be awesome. I'd love to see a versatile Pokemon like Mew or Latios or Latias come out as well. So a lot of things. I'd even like to see the genies like Thundurus, Landorus, and Tornadus. Specifically, I'd love to see Tornadus T, and I'd love to see Landorus and Landorus T. So yeah.
Yeah, maybe stuff like Landorus Genie will actually be OU power level now. Or like, I don't know. Someone said in one of my comments that like maybe Dialga will be OU now. I don't know if that's true, but it's crazy that we're even thinking about something like that with the power level of Gen 9.
I don't think anyone else is thinking about something like that. Maybe this guy's onto something, but I'm not too confident in that narrative.
The fact that for a second I was like, oh, maybe. Just says something, though.
But like, what was it? It has coverage for everything.
I guess so, yeah. You think about it for another 2 more seconds, it probably not.
You're like, wait, what? Like, probably not.
And yeah, earlier you said that you got into a competitive mindset, first off with baseball. Are there other competitive games you're into that you enjoy, either watching or playing on the side?
Games?
Yeah, games.
Like gaming communities? No, Pokemon is the only video game I play now because if I start playing another, I'm gonna get like absolutely addicted. But I do like playing like random like card games, like table games in real life, and I get super competitive. I'm like that guy in real life. I'm like trying to make eye contact, play mind games, like talking crap, all that. I actually had a game night with my girlfriend and her father on the day after Christmas. And it got a little too intense. He got a little upset at me, so we had to turn that down a little bit. But no, I don't play any other games. I used to play sports titles like Madden, MLB The Show, NBA 2K, but I've since kind of stopped using consoles. I haven't had a console since like PlayStation 3, so it hasn't been the same. And I've never been into like other games either competitively. So.
All right, I guess yeah, it would demand a lot of your time. You're the tier leader, and you're
Yeah,
playing
it's tough.
actively.
Because I also like work full time, like have like a family relationship to attend to. So it's definitely not. Yeah, I couldn't. I when I do something, I want to like do it in a dedicated fashion. I couldn't do it, so I'm pretty much focused on Pokemon.
Understandable. I like board games too. I play them with my brothers, and we do get very competitive about that as well. Like,
the thing is, like, I don't think people mind competitive. They mind when I talk crap after I do well. I gotta work on that.
All right, well, that's all my questions. I think we covered a lot of stuff. We could wrap it up there. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah. I actually, if you don't mind, I just want to say thank you so much for having me. It's so awesome, being able to reach other audiences and just talk about us. It's just humanizing Smogon and the council is great, but also just being able to like share thoughts, talk crap about the game, with people, different perspectives, learn about them. I'll be sure to try and poke my head in the comments when this goes up if people have other questions as well. And people always want to reach out to me on Twitter or Smogon or Discord. I'd love to talk. I just love people who play the game for the fun of it, and I hope that we can keep making it more fun, and I do love what I do, and I really am appreciative of this place I have and all the people that support me. So I just want to say thank you for having me so much, and I hope your channel continues to grow. You're doing great things, and I've been watching, so it's great, man. Round of applause to you.
Thanks, yeah, and no problem. Happy to have you on. It was a pleasure. Folks, check out Finchinator's channel. Almost said Freezeye there.
You could check out Freezeye's channel too. I love that guy.
You probably already have if you're watching this, but if not,
check out all the F users, but no one else basically. Finchinator, Freezeye.
Yeah, I've actually been watching your channel for a while. I really liked your Gen 5 content when SBL, I think last year.
It was tough because I had to cut that off. Actually, baseball season, real life made me too busy. I'm working on solutions for that for this upcoming April through October, and hopefully I'll find one.
But yeah, folks, if you want to see like good examples of like competitive games, Finchinator's content, it's not as like flashy as someone like Blunder, but he delves deep into like his decision making, stuff like that. If you want to improve your game, I think you'll get a lot of his content. So check that out, folks. It's really good. I watch the channel a lot myself.
Thank you.
We'll leave it at that. Thanks for watching, folks. Leave a like, subscribe, all that. Comment down below.